Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on avoiding Active Directory outages by unifying your change monitoring. We've got a great presentation prepared for you today to talk about how monitoring your Active Directory for changes can help you defend against ransomware attacks. So let's get started. I'm McKenna. I work alongside the Microsoft experts here at Chaosoft. Just a couple housekeeping items to go over before we jump into the presentation. First off, you'll notice your microphones are muted to make sure everyone has the optimal listening experience. But we do encourage you to ask any questions you may have. So depending on how you join today, either in browser or through the app, you'll see a question or chat section in your meeting dashboard. Feel free to drop your questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them if we have time. If we do run short on time today, don't worry, we'll reach out to you individually to follow up. While you're in your meeting dashboard, also make sure to check out the handout section. We've included some additional resources there that you can download and share with your team. This session will also be recorded, and we'll email you a link in the days following. At the end of the presentation, we'll also be sharing our contact information. So if you have any additional questions or are watching this on demand, please feel free to reach out. Also, make sure you stick around for the end of the presentation because we'll be doing a drawing for one lucky winner of a $50 Amazon gift card. Make sure, like I said, to stay on the line until then as we draw from the list of those present at that time. Whew, now that we've got all that taken care of, let's go ahead and jump in. With us today, we have the founder of Chaosoft, Robert Boble. Bob is one of the leading experts in hybrid Active Directory management and recovery. With more than 25 years in the Microsoft identity industry, he's gained tons of insights and best practices. So you guys are in great hands today. So on that note, I'll pass it over to Bob.
Thank you, McKenna. I really appreciate it. I'm pretty excited. It's kind of an exciting time right now with everybody transitioning from traditional on-premise, moving into a hybrid mode or into more cloud-only solutions that are delivered from Microsoft. We're right in the epicenter of all those changes, and it's a pretty exciting time to be doing what we're doing. Before we get going with the content around change monitoring and doing recovery of Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, I kind of wanted to look at a state of the union picture to try and figure out where most organizations fall. Are they on-premise? Are they in the cloud? Where are they? This was a study we commissioned at the very end of last year through a subsidiary of Gartner Group. It was now folded into Gartner. But they came back and identified that more than half of the people that we surveyed expected to be in hybrid mode indefinitely, meaning they didn't have a clear end date for being in hybrid. And again, hybrids where you have both your on-premise Active Directory and your cloud Azure Active Directory, and you're syncing between those two so that you can provide services for maybe legacy applications or users logging in your data centers on-premise, while also providing access to new cloud resources like Exchange or SharePoint in the cloud. When you looked at the additional people who were in hybrid mode but were going to go cloud only or attempt to go cloud only, that percentage we still sort of count in hybrid because they're currently in hybrid. They just have plans that are more definite than the hybrid indefinitely folks. And when you add up all of the people that are in hybrid mode currently, it was about 79%. So more than 3/4 of enterprise environments are currently hybrid. And we do see a trend with our customers to move components not just to the cloud, but also to try and manage most of their resources for their office workers, mailboxes, SharePoint, file and folder, print services, those types of things from the cloud. And so we definitely see that happening. But securing hybrid Active Directory is absolutely critical. To be honest, the shift to cloud has put Active Directory on-premise owners or legacy Active Directory owners in kind of a bind. That solution was never built to be exposed directly to the internet. And in order to connect it to cloud, while you do put security around it, it is definitely more connected to the outside world than it's ever been in the past. And so it actually can become the weak link in most of these cases for compromise. And so you just have to be careful. You have to monitor everything very closely. I mean, when I say everything, I mean everything going on in the directory, and treat that as the weak link. Everything starts typically with onboarding, going into the on-premise Active Directory, and then is synchronized up to the cloud. So if an incorrect change or a malicious change, or whatever is made, it's going to get to the cloud eventually. And so there's quite a bit of things that you can do to watch out for that. So we wondered in this situation, what are the impacts of an outage? So it's either a set of users that have some issue that prevent them from working, or it could be a complete outage of Active Directory. So we asked a group of administrators what their top 3 items were in terms of an outage. What impact would it have in terms of an outage? And they were allowed to choose multiple items. They were allowed to choose 3. And so again, this is part of that same Gartner study. What were the 3 impacts or most important impacts of a directory failure to your organization, and what are you most concerned about? Number 3 was loss of critical operational data. So you have production going on, and that might be tied to accounts where they're logging in Active Directory to record orders or whatever. So that stuff gets lost. Money, you're going to lose money because people can't do their jobs if there's an outage. But number 1 was certainly the ceasing of operations of the business. And so effectively, all of these good folks who had lots of experience in our industry for many years said that the number 1 problem with directory outage is that their organization would cease to operate. And that sounds pretty dramatic, but in reality, it's true. It does happen. And unfortunately, the number of cyber attacks in particular is not slowing down, it's increasing. And that's because the legacy directory is very vulnerable to denial of service. So it's easy to attack it in such a way that you prevent people from using Active Directory on premise, which is primarily for logging in and then getting authorization or access to resources. It's lots of settings, so lots of places to attack. So we call that being very porous, and it's hard to recover. It's very, very difficult to bring back if you lose your full directory. Here's just a quick list of cyber attacks that made the news. Colonial Pipeline, people probably remember that. SolarWinds, most recently, Okta, they're a big management company. We don't really compete directly with Okta, but they got hacked. And then when the Ukrainian and Russian war started, threat actors out of Russia actually attacked Ukrainian Active Directory servers and took them out as a precursor to starting that conflict. And so, this is not slowing down. In fact, just this week, and this is very unfortunate, ransomware shut down a very old college. This college was established in, I want to say, the late 1800s, but Friday, May 13th, 2022 is the closure date. They got hit with a ransomware attack, and it was determined that the cost of getting the data back was too high. They didn't have revenue in other areas, and so it basically shut the college down. And again, they were the first U.S. higher educational group in the United States, the first to be completely shut down, and that shutdown was initiated because of a ransomware attack. So that's pretty frightening. So let's look at the causes of these outages, right? They're important. You want to avoid them, but there's actually not just one. There are several different ways that outages can occur. Ransomware just happened to be the one that killed Lincoln College. There are other ones that I call it death by 1,000 cuts, and we'll talk about those next. So there are 2 primary ways, or 2 primary things that we see that cause outages for our customers. The first are unwanted changes, and the second is a cyber attack. Unwanted changes are definitely the more popular. They can be malicious changes, meaning somebody goes in and intentionally does something, but more likely they're just simple mistakes. And because there's a lack of control around both Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, lack of control and security around administrative changes, it's very popular for people to have more permissions than they should, and they make a mistake, and it causes some sort of outage. Unwanted directory change outages, however, are typically narrow in scope. It usually doesn't involve the entire company. It's usually a group of users that have a problem. Could be as few as one person can't get access to something, or is having a hard time logging in, or it could be an entire department, division, or what have you, could be unable to do their work. Cyber attack is definitely the one that we see constantly. I talked to one of the senior IT architects and owner of the security group at one of the top 5 banks a little while ago, and the comment from that individual was, "We're preparing for when our cyber attack happens, not if it ever happens." Right? It used to be good enough, to get a backup system so that if in case, maybe someday we get hit with an attack, or we have a server go out, or whatever it is, we'll be able to recover from it. They're not thinking that way now. They're thinking we may already have a compromise in progress, and it's just a matter of time before we see our first, for example, wiper attack or ransomware attack. So they're thinking of preparing for when the cyber attack happens, not if it ever happens. That's a great mindset, by the way. Part of Zero Trust initiative is to assume that there's already a breach in progress. Similar thing here. So, piece of advice: assume that an attack has already occurred and you need to be preparing for recovery of that. Schema corruptions is another way that these happen. This is very, very rare. I don't see this a whole lot. Oftentimes people will be monkeying around inside the Active Directory database structure itself. I have seen deletion of critical objects or things like that has caused it. I believe once, I'd heard a rumor, I wasn't affected by it, but Microsoft had an update one time on Active Directory that caused some issues. But typically when Active Directory is out, it affects your entire organization. It could be a domain, it could be just a single domain controller, it could be an entire forest. But recovering forest domains or domain controllers, that's kind of all one continuum. So that probably is what you're up against, or partitions with a cyber attack. That'll either be a ransomware attack or an attack designed just to wipe everything out, which we call wiper attacks. So be aware, more common, death by 1,000 cuts, are the unwanted directory changes, malicious changes or mistakes, or cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, et cetera, to shut your entire organization down. So let's talk about unwanted directory changes. They are, like I said, the most popular. They are and should be by everyone considered an insider threat. Just because it's unwanted directory changes, we didn't say necessarily it wasn't somebody who was an external person getting internal access. So be aware, it could be an external threat actor or somebody who is inside, like a contractor, but doing malicious things to gain access. Sometimes they're very hard to isolate without special help and can be very difficult and time consuming to fix. And again, if you have, couple hundred, couple thousand people out, they may have a situation where they get the day off, and that's expensive, right? Another thing I hear quite a bit is, our plan is if something happens, we have a data change that's a problem, we're just going to undo it with the recycle bin. Well, by the way, Microsoft does have recycle bins now on premise. You have to enable it, an on-premise AD, and in the cloud, it's automatically enabled. But the recycle bin is undelete. That's all it is. It does not do undo change. It's not an undo button. It's just undelete. It's a storage place for objects before they're finally processed for a full deletion. So you can't really use them if somebody wipes out a group or changes a bunch of departments, which now grant people access to other resources they shouldn't. Again, there's some research here that we found that is very interesting in this area. Insider threats begin in 3 main categories. Mistakes is obviously the most prevalent, more than half. So, 62%, that's a lot of mistakes on a day-to-day basis. Credential theft, and then people logging in under that user's credentials, that is a very popular cyber attack route. Get into their local workstation, compromise the workstation, grab the admin passwords, and then move laterally. And then lastly, malicious changes. Malicious changes are employees who are dissatisfied or unhappy, typically, and they want to exact their revenge on their management or the business or what have you. A very famous case at Tesla, they had an engineer who was very upset with the reviews, I believe the person had received, if I don't have that wrong, and was sabotaging production lines, and they weren't making their production numbers. And the person was eventually found out, and it was corrected, and then they started making their production numbers, and you know what happened after that. They become a very, very big success. But again, mistakes and malicious changes, those are the two main categories to watch out for. Over the past 2 years, there's been a spike in these. They're just increasing, just like regular cyber attacks. They've been up year over year. Over the last 24 months or so, 47% increase. A lot of people at home, lot of time on their hands, and 31% increase in the average cost. And I think to the industry, it's like $11.5 million it costs annually because of just mistakes being made. We saw one of those recently, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Quick case study here. Healthcare company. These good folks actually became a Chaosoft customer. They had 4,400 healthcare workers, including first responders, that suddenly on a late Friday lost access to their resources, their email, their Teams phone. They were using our solution, fortunately. They were in proof of concept with it. And Brian, who's going to do a demo here a little bit later on, got on the phone with them, immediately isolated the problem, and restored it. But you can imagine how difficult it would have been to restore the membership in a very, very large group. There was no list of people. Nobody printed out that list of group members, and it had been built up over time based on the need of the individuals. So it wasn't like they could just add everybody from a department. Pretty interesting. So it made it very difficult to roll that back, but it was successful. So how do you prevent this type of thing from happening? So by the way, the mechanism there was a group. It was a manually updated group that was being used to do group licensing on the Microsoft side. We call those group-based licensing. And there's a flaw with those types of operations, because most of the time you're going to use data-driven, so they'll be dynamically added or removed, but there are absolutely no controls around the data inside of Azure Active Directory or in Active Directory. So they can put in anything they want. Mistakes are very, very common. So this is not surprising. This just happened to be somebody who updated a group and had a question behind it that resulted in a couple thousand people being pulled. Very understandable. So, as I mentioned, how do you prevent unwanted changes? And then how do you deal with them if they do occur? First and foremost, you need to begin continuous monitoring of all the changes being made to both your on-premise directory and your cloud directory right away. You may have a SIEM tool in place. You may have an event log auditing tool in place. There are a couple of issues with those we'll talk about in a moment, but continuous change monitoring is not event log collection. It is literally monitoring the systems for changes in real time and then being able to react to those or record those. So that is the first step to getting along this line. And that takes some effort. Second piece is implement an easy to use, full-featured backup and recovery solution, specific for Active Directory or specific for Azure Active Directory. Veeam, Metallic, Commvault, those guys all have great tools for backing up your domain controllers and backing up your documents. They do not work with full forest recoveries, and I'll explain why here in a couple of slides when we get to the forest recovery. They also oftentimes will give you some ability to recover unwanted changes. So I can't say that they don't do that. Some of them do it very well. Just another way to get those things rolled back. Lastly, if you're not already talking zero trust internally or thinking about getting things under control so unwanted changes don't happen, then you really need to look at tightening up your day-to-day administration. Neither on-premise directory, Azure Active Directory, or Office 365 provide enough control around the people who are making administrative changes to prevent unwanted changes. They're going to happen if you have those platforms. And so you should be looking for a zero trust identity administration solution to layer on top of those. If you're hybrid, you need something that can do both. If you're cloud only, then you need something that will work with the cloud. But you need to think about that, because that's where most of those uncontrolled changes are coming from. The continuous monitoring will help you find people that have stolen credentials and are logging in inappropriately. They interact and work very nicely with your SIEM tool. to do those types of things, or your event log auditing tool. But this is a whole different beast. This provides things like roles and rules and automations so that you can make things more accurate and prevent inappropriate changes. Continuous change monitoring. What are you going to be looking for? Well, here's the idea. That's going to be a lot of data. Not only are you making changes to the directory from an administrative side, there are things in the solutions that allow end users to do that. They can change their own information under their account in the cloud, or if you're using a self-service solution. So keep that in mind. Then you have self-service group management. You have quite a few different places where changes are occurring. And in the cloud, it gets even worse because in the background, Microsoft is servicing their own platform, and suddenly you'll see mailboxes moving and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. But you want to make sure that you get a good hybrid solution. If you're one of those 79% that are in hybrid, you're going to review the changes that are detected periodically and often. It's a good idea to not necessarily rely on event logs, because they are often the first thing that gets hacked when a attack begins, or the programmer forgot to throw an event for certain things. So keep that in mind, that this will help those solutions. Set up your real-time alerts. Look for things that you want to avoid, like adding people to privileged roles or groups, making changes to native security in these platforms. All that should be looked at very carefully. And then in some cases, there may be changes you don't ever want to have happen, and so you might want to set up automatic remediation. Some of the things that you want to look for in terms of critical security settings, obviously your privileged roles and groups, which I mentioned. In the on-premise Active Directory, you have admin SD holder, also group policy. On the Azure side, you have Azure roles. Microsoft has integrated DNS and on-premise legacy Active Directory. You might want to look at that. Within the Azure platform, not only do you have Azure AD roles, but you also have Office 365 roles. By the way, there is a global admin account role holder that you can have. That global admin, anyone who's a member of that, can actually perform a unlogged escalation of privilege, so be careful there. Conditional access policies determine who can get in and out of your environment. You want to make sure that those changes are very well scrutinized. Then you have application policies, group policies, directory, server objects, all sorts of crazy stuff. So you really want a unified solution that looks at all of those things, not only because you want to see what's changing, but you should also choose a solution that looks for critical items that may be misconfigured. And those might be inviting additional attacks. So be very careful there. So any real-time change monitoring and alerting solution has the potential to enhance your SIEM or your auditing tools. I mentioned that logs are often the first thing to attack in a cyber attack. The idea is to blind the administrators from what actually is going on, so they can go, perform their nefarious tasks. And they may have been in your environment for quite some time, and so they know what they're doing, and they have a script usually that'll go off and make a lot of changes with the event log screwed up. There are times when things are not logged. It's just a fact of the way programming works. People forget to throw an event for something. Threat detection, that's important. Behaviors or looking at settings that are incorrect. And then anything that you're doing here is in some ways just a little bit faster, better, cheaper than trying to go and do all this stuff in a SIEM solution, which is event log based. One other big benefit to these tools is if your change monitoring solution also includes rollback, you could have automatic remediation of changes that are made and then throw an alert over to the SIEM tool to let people know it happened. So keep that in mind, that this is a very good enhancement to those existing solutions. It's definitely not a replacement. One of the things, if you have users that are idle, it costs money. Orders aren't being taken, products aren't being built, etc. So you want to strive for the shortest amount of time to keep these things at a minimum in terms of cost. Don't rely on Microsoft's recycle bins, because it's just an undelete. Doesn't help you with group membership updates or changes or deletions, or sorry, clearing those attributes, only object deletions. Security settings, conditional access policy, admin SD holder, all those things are targets, and you want to keep an eye on those for malicious changes or cyber attacks. Third party hybrid AD backup solution or hybrid cloud backup solution. You definitely want to look at that. You want something that does continuous collection of change. We also call that continuous backup. Snapshot based systems you have to be careful of because they're gaps in the record. They back it up on Monday, they back it up on Tuesday, and they back it up on Wednesday. And everything that happens between when the backup time on Monday and Tuesday is lost. So it doesn't show you a full list of changes if they're snapshot based. And so recovery can't be done accurately in those environments. Event log data we already talked about. We know that there's some issues there, but you definitely want immediate rollback of unwanted changes, and finding those changes may be even more critical. So when you look for a true hybrid solution, make sure it covers both AD, Azure AD, and Office. It should cover all those three things and some important items that you want to cover there. Now, with that said, I'd like to get Brian to give us a very good but brief overview of change monitoring, alerting, and also show how Chaosoft provides the ability to do some reporting and some of these things we call queries, which are really cool to show you things that are happening within your environment that you may not even be aware of. So with that, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Bob, and thanks everyone for joining. So what I want to do today is just run through, give you a quick sneak peek at the functionality, the core functionality of Chaosoft Guardian, how it works and how you use it. It's really, really simple to implement and to use. And its job is to look at your on-premise Active Directory and your Azure Active Directory and to watch for changes continuously and record whether they're new objects being created or deleted or attribute values changing. Record that data and potentially alert on it if you deem it as critical, and provide reporting and the ability to find particular data. And ultimately, if you see a change that absolutely should not have happened, to be able to undo or roll that change back to its previous state. So that's what we're going to look at here. I'll be pretty brief. You can see the dashboard we're looking at now. I've got a couple different Active Directories that I'm monitoring. I've got my Azure tenant that I'm monitoring as well. And you can see a little bit of some graphical data regarding frequency of changes over time, as well as the counts of objects that I'm monitoring. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off by just making a few basic simple changes. So I'm going to go over here to my Active Directory, and I'll just make a few standard changes. So for example, let's take this user. Let's put this user into the domain admin group as an example. So there we go. So there's one simple change. Let's pick another one here. Let's take Norm Peterson. Basic change, he's in the office of Boston. This is really, really simple, right? Pretty mundane. Let's move him to someplace else. And then ultimately, let's go ahead and delete another account. So let's take Barney Rubble here. Let's go ahead and delete Barney. He goes away. By the way, you'll notice probably already that I have an alert showing up in the Guardian console. That's telling me, I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says, new member added to the domain admin groups, and it tells me who it was. By the way, that is the reason it's showing up in red here. That is considered a critical alert, high severity. So I also generated an email notification. So an email showed up right away telling me about that alert with a link to take me back to that item in the Guardian console, which I'll show you in a moment. And also that notification was sent to Teams, and you can see the same detail in my Teams alert. So you can do alerting to either email or Teams or both, however you see fit. I'm going to go back to the actual Guardian console now, and what I'm going to do is look at change history, which is where all of the actual data comes in. So this gives me a running list of all the items, all the audited items, creation, deletion, modification over time. And I can see right here the one with the big red ball on there, again indicating that was a critical alert. That was for the domain admin group. If I double click on that and look at the details, I can see that was the domain admin group was modified. members were updated, and this Carla person was added. By the way, I also have this little rollback button here. So I can just click that. I'm not going to do that just yet. I also have another alert for the user itself. So in this case, when a group member changes, both the group is getting changed because the member is getting added, but the user is also getting changed because now he's a member of a group he wasn't before. So we give you actual both events so you can see it from both perspectives, and you can actually do the rollback from either one of these. In this case, there's the user, and their change was they were added to this particular group. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's go ahead and roll that back. And that's really all there is to it. So that change will be fixed. And then I made another change here. Here's my Norm Peterson change. Remember, we moved his office, and I can see the before and after values. And I say, wait a minute, Norm doesn't belong out here in Miami. He needs to go back to Boston. So let's roll that back as well. And then the last one was I deleted Barney. So that's pretty clear. I'm not going to undo Barney. I'm going to do another deletion later on. But the idea is all of this change activity is happening, and we're recording it as it occurs and providing you that data right away, so then you can decide if you need to do something about it. By the way, if I jump back over to my Active Directory now, let's take a look at Norm, and you'll notice his office is back to its correct value. It's no longer the bogus value we set it to a minute ago. And then what was my other change? So Carla, remember we added her to the domain admin group, and I did the restore on that, or the rollback. You notice domain admin group is no longer part of Carla's world, so that change was undone as well. So now once we have our data, all of our data in this grid, we can look for specific activities. So we can use these filters, the when, what, type, action, all this stuff, and filter. There are also a bunch of pre-built queries. So for example, you can see all of these so-called standard queries. This one that we were looking at right here called AD privilege group membership changes, that's the one that we actually had a built-in alert for as well. So you saw that happen with the domain admin membership change. But you see the rest of this list. These are the items, the pre-built queries that are out of the box. And then we can also create our own queries, which is what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to use our little filters here, and let's look for some time frame. I'm going to say I really only care about changes that occurred within the last 7 days. And type of an action am I looking for? I'm looking for deletion. So let's look for delete object. And then for the type of object I'm interested in, for this particular view, I'm looking for AD users. So when we add all these criteria together, you'll notice now my grid contains only deletions, nothing else, only AD users, so only user accounts that were deleted, so not OUs, not groups, not any other object type. And specifically, if I went through my when column here, all the dates, I wouldn't find anything older than 7 days, because those are the filters that I had built. So it's pretty easy to find stuff that way. And then I will save this. So let's call this users deleted in the last 7 days or something along those lines. Looks like I got that extra space there. Let's save that. So now this becomes just another query that I can toggle back and forth to at any time. So for example, when I look at more queries, I'll see all of the built-ins, plus here's my brand new one, my custom query that I just created, tells me who created it. So I can toggle back and forth and say, oh, I want to go back to that one now. And there we go. Now, another thing I can do with these saved queries is I can turn them into a report. So I can say, for example, let's add a report, and then I can define what schedule I want this report to run on. So I can say, you know what, I want this to run every week, say Monday at 8 a.m. That sounds good. Save that schedule. And then I can decide how it's going to be delivered. So I'm going to save it as HTML, and I want it to be delivered via email. Remember, I said you could do email or Teams, one or the other or both. I'm just going to do email in this particular case. And then one other thing that I like to do as well when I do a report delivery with email is I'm going to go into the properties. And by default, it's going to send me that report as a link. So it'll give me a link back to the report in the Guardian console. I like to also say, you know what? I just want to send the attachment. So that way the person that I'm delivering this to actually just gets the file. But that's just a preference. And I can save that. By the way, you can also run this on demand. So I'm going to go ahead and run it now. But otherwise, this is going to run every Monday at 8 a.m. Going to deliver that report as an HTML file. And if I jump back over to my email again now, you see I just received another new email, and there's my attached report. So let's go back to Guardian. Now, one more thing I can do with this as well is I can say I want this to be an alert. So in other words, anytime a user gets deleted, I want to receive a notification right away. I don't want to wait until a scheduled report. I don't want to wait until tomorrow when I happen to be looking at the console or browsing for stuff. I need an alert right away. So I'm going to go and say, let's add an alert. And then again, I can decide how that alert is going to be executed. So now the next time that I delete a user, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and edit the name of this here to make it a little more meaningful in the context of an alert. So I'm going to say user deleted, and there we go. So now the next time I delete a user, I should also get an alert. So let's go confirm that. Let's take Fred Flintstone this time, and let's delete our Fred user. And then within a few moments, we'll find out if we get our actual alert. And there it goes. So there's my alert showing up in red. By the way, if I refresh here, I've got another red indicator with the Fred Flintstone account getting deleted. And I should have also received an email notification, and there it is. So there's my email notification for the Fred Flintstone object being deleted. So that's kind of a quick run through of the core functionality of Guardian for being able to audit changes as they occur within Active Directory on-premise and Azure Active Directory, give you the ability to report and alert and find specific data, as well as undo or roll back changes. As an example, let's take Fred here and go ahead and roll back that deletion. And then if I go back to my Active Directory, there's no Fred here now. Let's refresh, and my Fred user is back. So anyway, that is pretty much all I wanted to show you on this morning's session.
Thank you, appreciate it. Did have a quick question. I'll just go ahead and address it before we move on to full force recovery. We have the change history that you just saw. That was the long list of all the changes happening that we've detected. And the question was, where is the rollback data stored? The answer is, it's all the same thing. That change history includes all of the changes we've seen in enough detail, very, very good detail actually, enough to roll those back. So those changes also include before and after values and other things that you might need for compliance or legal or regulatory reporting that you might have to sustain your, HIPAA, SOX, or whatever framework that you may be under as the way you do business or according to your business. Great question. There was another question. If you're observing changes, how do you know who made the change? And the answer is we are actually also collecting events and then correlating those. So we are getting the events from the system and then interrogating those events and matching them to the observed changes so that we can get a complete picture, both the initiator and the changes that were made. Before and after values, that type of data is all from direct observation and pre-recorded, or we do a initial baseline, and then we see what's changed over time. We're really getting very little, but important data out of the events. Plus, we have the ability to reference those as well. All right, great. Let's talk about full forest recovery. This is a topic that everybody's going to be faced with one time or another in the next several years, and how does it affect your business, or how it affects your business ends up being really how well you prepare. Paying money for the ransomware to go away, not doing that, letting your company go out of business, or facing the possibility your company goes out of business like Lincoln College did. Not only does it affect the business itself, it may affect the employees and put them out on the unemployment line. So this is a very serious subject, and hopefully you'll get some insight into what we can do as Chaosoft to help you avoid these catastrophes. Again, Active Directory has become on-premise. Legacy Directory has become a prime target. It was never really meant to be exposed to the cloud, and now there's all sorts of things with people work at home, and synchronizing and doing all sorts of crazy stuff to get that data up into the cloud. There are definitely places that need to be better secured within the product itself, but you may be in the unlucky few who get hit with a cyber attack that exploits a zero-day weakness that maybe we don't even know yet. Ransomware wiper attacks we talked about, directory corruption, schema problems, those types of things are usually the cause. The response is to secure your identities. We mentioned change monitoring, and then prepare for the full forest recovery. May end up being just a domain controller you want to bring back, could be a domain, could be a partition, could be a full forest. All those sort of fall within one sort of recovery scheme or case set. Oops, sorry about that. Let's look at Maersk. This happened quite a while ago. They're the world's largest shipping company. You see Maersk containers all over the place. You see them on TV and videos, etc. The ransomware attack that they got hit with destroyed 55,000 of their devices in less than 10 minutes. They had one domain controller that lived, meaning it was either offline or protected in another way, or had replication not hitting it. All of their 1,200 applications that were connected to Active Directory went offline because Active Directory was gone. And the CIO ended up sleeping in the office for 70 days while they tried to recover it. The AD piece alone took 9 days to recover. And at the very end, they reported a $350 million loss. And the way they got back was to do a manual recovery. But what they do, and what others that have this sort of thing happen, where you end up with one domain controller, maybe an old backup, is you can't just go recover your files and folder data because there's nothing governing who can access those, right? Or allowing the access. So you really need to recover your identities in Active Directory first and foremost. Once those are back online and working, you have to make sure you didn't reintroduce the compromise that took the environment out in the first place. So resetting all the passwords and looking for changes that were made to the default security. All those things have to be done because you're working with a potentially dirty version of Active Directory, one that's been potentially compromised. That's why directory backup solutions in one way are very, very good, because they can prevent a lot of those things that would carry that infection, or that allow that attack to be done also on the replacement forest. So be very careful there. So what does it actually take to recover Active Directory? So the full forest Active Directory recovery traditionally and manually is really time consuming. It's hundreds of manual steps. You have to pre-plan it. It's not just oh my God, my forest's down, go get the playbook and start working it. You can't. If you haven't already prepared for it, you're done. It's going to be very difficult. You're going to try and do it step by step to get through it. It'll be very, very incomplete. The idea is to bring back each domain individually with a backup of a domain controller. If you don't have those, then you're pretty much out of luck. You have to start there. Anyway, We listed 22 steps to sort of give you the process here. I'm not going to go through all of those. It's just that's the typical set of processes that you need to go through, boiled down into just a step-by-step list. Now, Microsoft, just like object and attribute or directory data change recovery, they don't do it. They just don't help you with forest recovery. They do, however, provide you some documentation on or guidance on how you can do it, but there is no software solution for this from Microsoft. There are 3 vendors, including Chaosoft, that purport to provide forest recovery. We have one install that does everything. I think the newer competitor in the space has 2 different products that you need to buy, and then the original legacy solution, I think it's 5 different products that you may end up having to filter through to figure out exactly what you need to get this thing done. It doesn't have to be that difficult, folks, but guidance is not going to help you much. A lot of people try this. A lot of people hire consultants to script things to get them all set, but then it's so arduous to do, they never test it. So again, we did a study to see if testing was a problem. It turned out that most people believe they should test their forest recovery quarterly, but the majority of people were actually trying to do it yearly, and some were failing to do it yearly. This brings me to one last piece, which is traditional backup vendors. Veeam, folks that we know over there pretty well, Metallic, Commvault, you name it. There are lots of those folks out there. Acronis, maybe another one. Those folks really do a great job at file and folder backup and SharePoint backup and mailbox backup. And they might do object and attribute recovery, but typically they're taking their snapshot backups, which means changes may be missed between the different backups you're doing. So that's sort of one knock against the core backup vendors out there. The second piece is that they typically do bare metal backups, and a bare metal backup would be used in the case you have a full forest outage. The problem with a bare metal backup is that it gets the entire operating system and recovers that along with the Active Directory information to a virtual machine or to a physical machine. So if that machine is a domain controller, you get a recovery of a domain controller that looks the same because it's actually all in the backup. The problem is it comes with the operating system too, which is the part that likely was infected that caused the ransomware to wipe out the forest in the first place. So what you see is you have your legacy or traditional backup vendors backing up a domain controller. It gets wiped out. That DC gets wiped out with the ransomware, and they get that little, pay us 10 million Bitcoin and we'll forgive it and give you the key. And they say, oh, I can restore it. So they restore to a new clean machine and start it, and up comes the ransomware message again, right? So you don't want to do that because obviously it doesn't help you get through it. So you want a solution that does just the directory components, very small backups, very portable, easy to protect. In fact, storing it in Azure storage is probably a good idea because there really isn't much out there that will try and compromise an Azure storage location versus an on-premise file server where you may be storing your other backups. So the backups are probably even safer when you're just doing directory information in what we call a clean backup versus a bare metal or full system backup. With forest recovery, remember the entire operation, your entire business is on the line, and so you want to back up starting, if you're not already doing it, you need to start tonight or now. Starting after this webinar probably wouldn't be a bad idea. But the idea is that you want to do your backups and assume that you're already compromised, that the forest outage is about to occur. That's the way I would look at this. So you need to have immediacy around this, and you want to shorten the amount of time possible, make it a short amount of time to recover as possible so that you're able to limit the impact that this thing has on your organization. Prepare for your forest backup, work to get to instant forest backup. Just a pitch for our solution, we do immediate and instant. Immediate means you have a backup, you click one button, it rebuilds it in an Azure isolated recovery lab. We also have instant backup, which effectively creates hot standby forests for you. If you're interested in more of that, you can see the links that we're going to provide at the very end. So the big thing with forest recovery is that it's been in the past very much too difficult to deal with, so people don't, or they only test it once a year because it's so complex, et cetera. I'd like to ask Brian if he could do us a favor and show just how simple forest backup and recovery can be made, and in particular, if he'd show the ChaosOff tool, I'd really appreciate that. So he's going to talk about backup plans, he's going to talk about recovery plans, and he's going to show you the results of an immediate forest recovery. Over to you, Brian.
Okay, there we go. So this part's going to be very quick. So you'll notice that this is also part of the same tool. So it's not a whole separate product that you have to install and manage all separately. Within the same tool we talked about earlier, we have the ability to do backup and recovery for purposes of recovering an AD forest in the event of a pretty serious catastrophe. So I'm just going to jump right ahead to my recovery plan here. Now I've already done my recovery, but I'll just show you what my recovery plan looks like. So for example, this is my recovery plan. And the really cool part is I have the ability to do my recovery to an empty Azure forest. I don't have to have anything prepared in advance. I don't have to build a bunch of VMs, have them ready to restore to. I could do this all on the fly. And I do this by clicking deploy recovery site. You notice mine says redeploy. That's because, like I said, I've already done this. If there's nothing in Azure, it's going to go and create an entire recovery site. It'll create the Azure VMs. In fact, let me just jump over there and show you. So here's my Azure resources. It created the Azure VMs and all the other related resources to make these, make these VMs work. And I went through this process, and then once you got the recovery site available, then you can actually run your recovery, which will take your backups that you've backed up previously, and it restore that AD to those newly provisioned VMs in Azure. By the way, you can also do this to on-premise VMs if you want to do that yourself. In that case, you would have to pre-build the VMs yourself. It makes it really convenient when you do it to Azure. By the way, when I jump over here and look at these VMs, I'm going to log into my primary domain controller. So let's do connect. And let's just see that the recovery actually worked and my data is actually there. So let's log in. And what we should find is all of our AD that I had before should all be here. I'll open up my directory. And then I'm going to turn on, max out my filter here.
Boy, it's like you have a brand new DC, just like the one you
Yep.
had.
Yep, it's a brand new DC. And if I now navigate to my structure, I see, oh yeah, it looks good. All my OUs are here. And if I look at test users, you see it's counting. It should be 25,000 of them in there, but that's kind of the whole point is I expect to find all of my AD that I originally had is back the way it was. And there we go. There's my 25,000 users. And the rest of my AD is all as it was before, ready to go. So that's kind of the idea is when you have a major catastrophe and your AD is just gone, it's totally unusable, broken, disappeared. What I need to do is just get back in business. I don't need to restore 300 domain controllers today. I just need to get my AD back alive so people can start to function and work again.
It's a tremendous thing. I think part of what I think is so cool about this solution is that your existing directory is still there, right? You're just now showing the test version, which is
Yep.
the cloud version. This also brings up a really good point. It may be that you just need an isolated lab to test application upgrades. This would do that. So you could have one backup plan that gets a couple of DCs, a couple of maybe 2 domains or whatever you're trying to test, not a lot of machines out there, might not be necessary. You could back that up once a week or once a month and restore it to the cloud and have that as your test cloned forest. You could take another complete backup that is maybe a little more extensive, has your FSMA role holders, has the other, maybe a DC per environment or per domain, and use that for your full forest recovery. And the cool part is that because those are isolated, they're available but isolated. So if you did get hit with a ransomware attack, you can just shut down your DCs and change your routing to send the authentication traffic over to that. As long as you're using Express Route or one of the other solutions for connecting your on-prem AD to the cloud, integrating that through a software-defined network. But that gives you an instant recovery in that case. And this product also has the ability to schedule backups to occur so that you can actually have multiple recovery sites. You can create hot standby or fully fault tolerant or redundant forests out there so that there is no recovery if you get hit with ransomware. You shut down your machines to preserve the forensics for the FBI, and then you simply switch your routing. I call it throwing the switch because literally you're changing the routing to the latest version of your isolated recovery lab, version 1 or version 2. Maybe you recover, backup and recovery every day. So you always have a minimal amount of data that you've lost in between there.
Yep, so there's my backup. I've got 2 domains in my forest and my backup runs, and I got 3 domain controllers total, 2 in my root domain and another one for my child. And then that just, does my backup on a regular basis. And then I can, from that, build any old recovery plans that I want. So I just said I wanted a forest recovery. There's my forest, there's my most recent backup. And I could say, yep, there we go. And just go through the process. It only takes, a few seconds to build that. And now you can see I can deploy a recovery site. And then once that recovery site's deployed, that's what's going to get me, if I go back to my resources here, that's what's going to get me all of this stuff. I started with nothing. And when I clicked on deploy recovery site, I got all those resources. And then at that point, you can actually do the recovery, and it takes the AD from your backup and essentially promotes these VMs to domain controllers and restores the AD back as it was to those new DCs and goes through the whole process. There's a whole series of steps that's built into that document that Bob pointed out earlier with the process for recovery. It's just all automated.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate that. So what I'll do is I'll flip back over if I can get my mouse working now. All right, let's get through this. I appreciate everyone's time today. Chaosoft, if you haven't heard of us before, we effectively provide management, monitoring, and recovery solutions for Microsoft platforms. We do also do a little bit for Google, not a whole lot yet, but we're just starting that process to do it. 2 core products that we have are Chaosoft Guardian and Guardian Forest Recovery. Chaosoft Guardian is the same product as Forest Recovery. Forest Recovery just has the extra bit that will allow you to actually do the full forest recovery. Very powerful solution. I think if I'm looking at competitors, we probably replace 7 to 9 separate installations and products with one solution of most of our competitors. And again, instant object and attribute recovery. Those are the unwanted changes, and instant forest recovery. And our second solution is called Chaosoft Administrator. This is the zero trust identity administration platform that also provides enforcement for identity governance and integrates with the recovery component for identity resilience. But if you're looking at license optimizations for Office, you're looking for user provisioning and deprovisioning of hybrid users, this is a full, true administrative platform for simplifying and controlling day-to-day administration and automation of admin tasks. This is one of those key components for zero trust. So with that said, if you are interested in either of our products, we have some links here for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to McKenna and let her walk us out.
Thanks, Bob. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That concludes our presentation today. We'll go ahead now and take attendance for that gift card drawing. So if you are the lucky winner, we'll email you directly with more information and to get your information. We'd like to thank everyone for their time today and hope you enjoyed the webinar. As you'll see on your screen here, we've got a few quick links for the Chaosoft website. Should you have any additional questions, you can visit chaosoft.com/question. You'll also see there's one for scheduling a personalized demo or getting our free trial. And of course, if you have any questions about Chaosoft or our solution, you can get some more information there at chaosoft.com. Again, everyone, thank you so much for your time and have a great day.